Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are jumping right into a stack of sources today, taking a close look at the ongoing federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs in Manhattan.
That's right. We've gathered materials from, Reuters, the BBC, Forbes, NPR, WOT, and we've even dug into excerpts directly from the official sealed indictment itself.
Our mission here is pretty simple. Pull out the most important insights, the key nuggets of knowledge from these materials so you can understand what's really happening in that courtroom.
Yeah, we're looking at the charges, the prosecution strategy.
How the defense is pushing back, and the most significant testimony that's been heard so far.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the legal battle unfolding based purely on what these sources tell us. We're just kind of guiding you through the info presented.
Okay, let's unpack this first. Maybe start with an overview of who we're talking about and what's actually on the table here.
Sure. So, Sean Combs, a name many people know, but he's gone by a few, right? Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, PD, Love.
Yeah, a major figure in hip-hop, obviously. Founder of Bad Boy Records. Built this huge business empire too. Fashion, liquor like Ciroc and DeLeon, media with Revolt TV.
Huge. The sources estimate his current wealth is somewhere around $400 million.
But despite all that success, he's facing these incredibly serious federal charges.
Yeah.
In Manhattan federal court.
That's right. The indictment lays it out. 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution.
And importantly, he has pleaded not guilty to all of them.
Correct. He maintains his innocence. But the stakes are incredibly high. If he were convicted on these charges, the potential sentence, according to the sources, is 15 years to life in prison.
Wow. And this trial isn't expected to be short either?
No, not at all. Estimates we're seeing in the sources suggest it could last anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, maybe longer.
And it's happening right there in Manhattan federal court. Public can go, but no cameras, no streaming online.
Exactly. And it's probably worth noting, as the sources do, that this federal criminal trial isn't the only legal fight he's involved in. There are also dozens of civil lawsuits pending against him.
Right. And he's reportedly pushed back on those, calling them attempts for a quick payday, something like that.
Yeah. And his defense team has publicly called those civil allegations baseless or even sickening. So lots happening on multiple legal fronts.
Okay, let's get into the core of the prosecution's case in this trial, the federal one. As outlined in the sources, it really seems to hinge on RICO, right? The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
Yes, absolutely.
We usually hear about RICO with, mafia cases. Why is it being used here based on what the sources say?
Well, that seems to be the key strategic move by the prosecution. The legal experts quoted in the sources explain that RICO is central because it allows prosecutors to introduce evidence of other alleged crimes, sometimes called bad acts. Acts that aren't necessarily the direct charges in this indictment. It's a way for them to paint a much larger picture for the jury, a potentially more damning picture, of alleged criminal activity that goes beyond just the specific trafficking counts.
So it connects dots that might otherwise seem separate.
Kind of. The prosecution's theory, based on what we see in the indictment excerpts, is that Combs allegedly led a criminal organization. They've actually named it the Combs Enterprise.
The Combs Enterprise.
Yeah. And they allege it's been operating for a significant period, starting back in at least 2008.
And this Combs Enterprise, according to the prosecution, it's not just his formal companies like Bad Boy.
No, it's portrayed as more than that. It's Sean Combs at the top, allegedly integrating entities like Bad Boy Entertainment and Combs Global, yes, but also including certain employees and associates who are allegedly part of this scheme.
And the alleged purposes of this enterprise, the indictment details sound pretty serious, going way beyond just running a business.
Absolutely. The sources really highlight this. The alleged goals included, the usual stuff like protecting and enhancing Combs' reputation, power, brand, enriching loyal members. Right. But also, allegedly, using violence, threats, and abuse to enforce that power and secure loyalty. And crucially, the indictment alleges the enterprise was used to fulfill Combs' sexual desires through the exploitation of women and sex workers.
So enabling things like sex trafficking.
Allegedly enabling unlawful acts like sex trafficking, yeah.
Right.
And protecting the enterprise from law enforcement through intimidation, maybe bribery, threats against witnesses. It's basically presenting the business empire itself as a vehicle for alleged criminal activity.
Wow. Okay. Now, one particularly disturbing element that's come up a lot in the sources through the indictment and testimony are these alleged freak-offs. What are these described as?
Well, based on the indictment and the witness accounts we're seeing reported in the sources, these are described as elaborately planned events, staged, often videotaped sexual encounters. They allegedly involved male commercial sex workers and women, and the sources state they were arranged and directed by Combs himself.
And how were these supposedly facilitated? It sounds like quite an operation, if the allegations are true.
It's described as highly organized, almost systematic. The sources detail actions like arranging travel for the women and the sex workers involved, allegedly distributing narcotics to victims to ensure compliance,
Yeah.
controlling victims' careers and finances, using intimidation, using violence, and the alleged role of employees is really highlighted too.
In what way?
Things like booking hotels, stocking the rooms with specific supplies, controlled substances are mentioned, and truly enormous quantities of baby oil or lubricant. One source mentioned over 1,000 bottles.
1,000 bottles.
That's what's reported. Also, cleaning rooms afterward, arranging travel, delivering large sums of cash to pay the sex workers, and even scheduling 5e fluids for recovery afterwards.
For recovery, okay. And this connects back to some of the physical evidence the sources mentioned being seized.
Yes, exactly. The sources mentioned physical evidence seized during those searches of Combs' residences back in March 2024. That included narcotics, baby oil, lubricant, firearms, and ammunition.
And didn't they mention specific types of firearms?
Yes, it's noted that these included AR-15 style rifles, some allegedly with defaced serial numbers.
Okay, let's shift to the testimony, because that's been a huge part of this trial so far. The prosecution's star witness seems to have been Cassandra Cassie Ventura. She testified for 4 days.
Absolutely. Her testimony, as reported across multiple sources, is clearly central to the case the prosecution is building.
Tell us about it. How did her story unfold on the stand?
Well, she described meeting Combs when she was just 19, an aspiring musician. She signed to his label Bad Boy, and then a romantic relationship began. She talked about initially falling for his, larger-than-life persona.
But that obviously changed, according to her testimony.
Dramatically. Her testimony quickly shifted to how that relationship allegedly became incredibly controlling and violent.
What kind of details did she give?
She described Combs allegedly controlling really basic aspects of her life. Things like her rent, her car, her phone, sometimes taking them away as, punishment. She testified about alleged physical abuse, too, mentioning an incident where her eyebrow was slashed, another where she was kicked in the head at a party.
And then, of course, there's the 2016 hotel hallway incident, the video that became public. The sources confirmed that video was shown in court, right?
Yes, absolutely shown to the jury. That video shows Combs kicking her, shoving her, dragging her down a hallway. She testified about the gash she sustained from that and about a plastic surgeon she says Combs hired afterwards.
And her testimony also covered those freak-offs we mentioned earlier.
Yes, extensively. She said she was introduced to them about a year into their relationship. She testified that she initially participated sort of to make him happy, but found them deeply humiliating over time.
How did you describe them?
She said they could last up to 4 days, allegedly required drugs like ecstasy or cocaine just to stay awake. She mentioned physical injuries resulting from them, like UTIs, blacking out. She used words like feeling worthless and said participation essentially became a job.
That's incredibly difficult testimony. And did she mention recordings of these events?
Yes, she did. She testified that Combs allegedly showed her videos of these encounters on his laptop and threatened to release them if she didn't, quote, behave. She said it made her feel completely trapped.
The relationship ended when?
In 2018, which notably is the same year she alleged in her later civil suit that a rape occurred.
Right, that civil suit. Filed in November 2023, alleging abuse and rape. And it settled incredibly quickly, the very next day. The sources are now confirming the settlement amount was $20 million.
That's the figure reported, yes. And she was asked about this directly in court during the criminal trial.
How did she respond to that? To the implication, presumably from the defense, that her accusations might be financially motivated.
She addressed it head-on. She testified, quite powerfully according to the reports, that she would give all that money back in a second to undo the freak-offs and regain her agency and autonomy. It was framed as a direct rejection of any financial motive.
And there's another settlement mentioned, too.
Yes. The sources also note she expects another $10 million settlement, this one from Intercontinental Hotels, related to that 2016 incident video release.
And her testimony didn't just cover the events themselves, but the lasting impact, too.
No, it went deeper. She spoke very personally about ongoing trauma, about considering suicide just 2 years ago because of flashbacks, and about seeking therapy with her husband's support to cope.
So, incredibly impactful testimony over those 4 days. But she wasn't the only witness, right? The sources detail testimony from others.
That's right. Several other notable figures took the stand, according to the reporting we've reviewed.
Like who?
Well, there was rapper Kid Cudi. He testified that he believed Combs broke into his home and suggested Combs was likely involved in his car being set on fire shortly after Cudi had dated Ventura.
Okay.
Then there was singer Dawn Richard. She was in the group Danity Kane, which was formed on Combs' reality show Making the Band. She testified that she personally witnessed Combs assault Ventura back in 2009, describing finding Ventura in the fetal position.
Wow. Did she say anything else?
Yes. Richard testified that Combs later spoke to her about the incident, telling her what she saw was just passion, and then allegedly added, ominously, that people go missing if they talk about things.
That's chilling.
Yeah.
Any other witnesses corroborating abuse?
Yes. A hotel security guard from the 2016 incident testified that Combs actually offered him cash afterwards, seemingly to buy his silence after the guard saw him beating Ventura.
Okay.
And a male escort named Daniel Phillip testified as well. He said he was paid to have sex with Cassie while Combs watched, and that he also witnessed Combs physically assault her, throwing a bottle at her, pulling her by the hair, dragging her.
So multiple accounts describing alleged patterns of behavior and connecting back to the physical evidence.
Right. A U.S. Homeland Security Special Agent, Yesin Binda, testified about the items seized from Combs' hotel room when he was arrested, specifically mentioning the cash, drugs, and baby oil found there.
And as we mentioned, that 2016 hotel video, that's a key piece of evidence shown in court.
Absolutely. Judge Subramanian deemed it admissible, despite the defense trying to keep it out, so the jury saw it.
Okay, so that's a sense of the prosecution's case, built on Iconot, the alleged enterprise, and this powerful, often disturbing testimony and evidence. But the defense, naturally, is pushing back hard. Led by attorney Mark Agnifilo. What's the core of their strategy, based on the sources?
Well, the core argument, as reported, seems to be this. While they have conceded that abuse did occur in the relationship with Ventura.
They conceded that.
Yes, that's been reported. They've conceded abuse occurred. But they're arguing strongly that this was purely domestic violence between two people, not the larger federal crimes of sex trafficking or racketeering. They're trying to contain it, legally speaking.
And part of that strategy involves this idea of mutual violence or mutual abuse.
That's a specific tactic that's been reported, yes.
Yeah.
The defense suggesting there was hitting on both sides, trying to portray it as a two-way street.
But how does that hold up legally? What do the experts say in the sources?
Well, the legal experts quoted really push back hard on that framing. They state pretty clearly that mutual abuse isn't really a recognized legal defense in this context.
Right.
They explain that abuse fundamentally is about a pattern of behavior used by one person to maintain power and control over another. So what might look like mutual violence can often be, a trauma response or someone simply fighting back defensively. That's fundamentally different from the controlling, systemic behavior that defines abuse, according to these experts.
So the experts are basically saying you can't just equate someone reacting to being controlled with the alleged actions of the person exerting that control.
That's the gist of it, based on the source material, yeah. The defense has also tried to reframe the alleged sexual activities, especially the freak-offs, by suggesting they were part of a consensual swingers lifestyle, or maybe just, part of the world of rock and roll, implying these things happen and are okay within that context.
Is there precedent for that kind of argument?
The sources draw an analogy to the Trevor Bauer case, the baseball player, where a similar defense was used regarding allegations of physically painful sexual activity being consensual.
Interesting. And the defense also used Cassie Ventura's own words against her during cross-examination.
Yes, they reportedly used text messages where she seemed to indicate willingness to participate in freak-offs, citing messages like "always ready," trying to counter the prosecution's narrative of coercion.
What other arguments has the defense made, according to the sources?
Well, beyond denying the specific federal charges, they've consistently called the civil allegations sickening. They also filed a motion earlier, trying to dismiss one charge by arguing Combs was unfairly targeted due to his race. And they've argued that evidence like the bad acts testimony things not directly charged is irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial, just designed to make Combs look bad. Which, of course, contrasts directly with the prosecution saying it shows the means and methods of the alleged criminal enterprise.
It definitely highlights some complex legal challenges and courtroom dynamics.
Absolutely. And as you brought up earlier, the use of RICO itself here is something legal experts flag as Well, maybe not typical. It's usually associated with organized crime, like the mafia.
Though it has been used in other cases.
Yes, the sources note it has been applied in other sex crime cases, maybe most famously in the R. Kelly trial. So there is some precedent, but it's still seen as a somewhat unusual application by some commentators.
And the defense hasn't just been fighting the substance of the charges. They've also challenged the process itself, haven't they?
They have. They tried to get the trial delayed, but Judge Subramanian denied that request, basically saying it was made too late.
And they asked for a gag order.
Yes, they sought a gag order for potential witnesses and even federal officials, arguing that improper pretrial publicity was making a fair trial impossible. The judge denied that too, although he did apparently call some quotes attributed to federal sources in the media plainly improper.
Given all that publicity, how did they even select a jury?
The sources describe it as a pretty detailed process. Potential jurors were vetted carefully for impartiality. They were asked about any prior knowledge of the case, their views on hip-hop artists generally, or on violence and sexual assault.
And specifically about that hotel video.
Yes, they were specifically asked if seeing that 2016 hotel video would unduly influence them. The judge really emphasized the need for a fair and impartial jury, despite the high-profile nature of the case.
Now, there's also the whole issue of Combs' detention. He hasn't been out on bail.
No, he's been held at the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC Brooklyn, since his arrest back in September 2024.
And you tried to get bail.
Yes, his team made requests for bail, even proposing a $50 million bond and house arrest. But Judge Subramanian denied those requests.
Why? What reasons did the judge give, according to the sources?
The judge cited several factors based on the evidence presented. Combs' alleged propensity for violence, a finding that there was a serious risk of witness tampering, and evidence of alleged attempts to corruptly influence witness testimony.
Like what kind of attempts?
Things like asking family members to reach out to victims, trying to create narratives to counter allegations, using a birthday video message in a way the prosecution argued was improper influence, and also allegedly violating prison regulations while inside MDC.
And the defense has raised concerns about the jail itself.
Yes, they've voiced concerns about the conditions at MDC Brooklyn.
And wasn't there some controversy about notes he was taking in jail? Something about attorney-client privilege?
Correct. That came up. There was an issue over handwritten notes Combs made in jail. The prosecution claimed they revealed a witness tampering plot, while the defense argued they were protected by attorney-client privilege. Ultimately, the judge ordered the prosecutors to get rid of their copies of those notes.
Okay, so a lot of legal maneuvering happening alongside the testimony. Finally, the sources we looked at also included some broader context, touching on public and even political commentary surrounding the trial.
Yes, they did.
And it's really crucial, as we report this, to state clearly that we are simply relaying what the source material contains. We're not endorsing or taking any side on these political viewpoints or claims ourselves.
That's a very important distinction to make. So, according to the source material, former President Donald Trump was asked about a potential pardon for Sean Combs. Should Combs be convicted, and should Trump return to office?
What did he say?
Trump reportedly said he would look at the facts, but added that he hasn't paid close attention to the case and hasn't actually seen Combs in years.
Okay. And the sources also reported comments from others pre-election.
Yes, specifically mentioning comments made before the November 2024 election by Donald Trump Jr. and Elon Musk. According to the reporting, they made remarks linking celebrities who had endorsed Kamala Harris to Diddy's alleged freak-off parties.
What was the suggestion?
The reported suggestion was that these celebrities either received some kind of protection or were potentially subject to blackmail related to those parties. Again, this is just what the sources reported them as saying. We're presenting it impartially.
Right. Okay, so as we sort of wrap up this deep dive into the sources, the core legal conflict really seems to boil down to this, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. On one hand, you have the prosecution's narrative, a sophisticated criminal enterprise, the Combs enterprise, engaged in serious federal crimes like sex trafficking and racketeering, allegedly enabled by a vast business empire and complicit associates.
And on the other hand,
the defense argument. This is fundamentally a deeply toxic and violent domestic relationship that's being reframed, maybe over-criminalized, as something much larger that it wasn't, at least not in the way RICO defines it.
So the jury is left with this incredibly difficult task, weighing all this evidence and testimony.
Exactly. They have to differentiate between what the defense portrays as maybe a consensual, if unconventional, swingers lifestyle or tragic mutual violence within a private relationship.
And What the prosecution alleges was systematic sex trafficking, forced compliance, and exploitation, all enabled by immense power, control, and coercion wielded through this alleged enterprise.
It's a huge task for any jury.
Yeah. And maybe the provocative thought to leave you, the listener, with just drawing from all this source material
Yeah.
is to really consider how fame, immense wealth, and concentrated power can potentially create these environments where the lines between consent and coercion might become incredibly blurred.
Yeah, and how truly challenging it can be for anyone on the outside, maybe even those on the inside sometimes, to fully understand the complex, often hidden dynamics of relationships operating at that level, under that kind of spotlight and pressure.
What does this deep dive into what the sources say happened and how it's being argued legally suggest about the inherent difficulties in seeking justice and accountability in these really high-profile cases? Something to think about.